If you've been tracking your food and logging every gram of protein, carb, and fat that crosses your lips, but still struggle to see results, or worse, you're exhausted by the constant measuring and tracking, this episode is for you. My guest today has discovered that for many people, especially those caught in chronic dieting cycles, tracking macros might be masking deeper metabolic issues that no amount of precision measuring can solve. Christina McClurken, known as Your Healthy Bestie, joins me to discuss a surprisingly simple approach that's helped her clients lose stubborn fat without the mental burden of tracking macros. Whether you're burned out from tracking or simply curious about alternative approaches, this conversation will challenge you to rethink what's truly necessary for lasting fat loss results. Welcome to Wits and Weights, the show that helps you build a strong, healthy physique using evidence, engineering, and efficiency. I'm your host, Philip Pape, and today we're discussing an approach to fat loss that doesn't rely on tracking every calorie or macro, something many of us in the evidence-based fitness world, myself included, might find surprising. You might think, why am I talking about this on the show when I'm such a data nerd? Yet increasingly, it is relevant if we are honest with ourselves about the real underlying principles about personalizing the experience to the individual and what it truly takes for fat loss. So my guest today is Christina McClurken, known as Your Healthy Bestie.
That's me, yeah.
That's you, all right. I love it. And Christina began her career as a physical therapist, specializing in geriatrics, and that gave her definitely a unique perspective on the long-term consequences of neglecting health, which many of us have probably seen with individuals in our lives as they get older. And she wanted to break free from those patterns of diet culture that she developed growing up in the 80s. Hey, we're from the same generation.
That we are.
And then she immersed herself in the science of metabolism. She developed a balanced eating blueprint, the balanced eating blueprint. And that's her program focused on the 6 pillars of sustainable weight loss without constant measuring or tracking. So today, you are going to learn how understanding blood sugar can reduce cravings and promote energy, what's missing in your fat loss journey, tips you can implement today if you're looking for that more intuitive approach to nutrition that still delivers results. Christina, welcome to the show.
Hi, Philip. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And so let me just start with this, right? The research. The research seems to show that tracking calories and macros improves your outcomes and maintaining your results. If so, why would anyone not want to track?
Oh my goodness. Wow. Do we have a whole hour for this? Yeah, I think there's research to support just about anything and everything, right? Whether you or I agree with it or not, I think that is something that we can agree on, right? That there's lots of research. I am a big scientific nerd myself, and I am all about N of one, meaning you need to be an experiment of your own one person, because whatever the research says, it may work for you and it may not. So I can't remember whose quote it was I heard, but it was said, just let research refine your approach, but not define your approach, because we can kind of lose ourselves in the weeds if we're constantly following the research, because you could be jumping ship every 2 days on a new weight loss approach. So, I find, as like you said, a female especially who grew up in the 80s, and I always like to say diet culture is basically part of our DNA, right? When we grow up, then it's just kind of built into the hardwiring. There is a lot of negative connotation and stress and emotional weight, no pun intended, that comes along with constantly looking at your food as in a calorie or a macro or a point or a container or whatever way you want to look at it. So while it may be helpful for some to know numbers and to do that, it may not be helpful for some. And that is part of what I found for myself for a period of time in my life, and for a lot of women that I coach. And I say a period of time in my life because now that I've healed my relationship with food, I'm okay counting numbers if I need to for periods of time. But I think we have to honor each individual and where they're coming from in their journey. And as you and I both know, stress is a big impediment to weight loss. So if stress comes from numbers, we have to find a way to work around that too.
Yeah, beautifully said. And honestly, I agree with everything you're saying, and we're not going to be arguing today. Trust me.
Yeah.
Some of this is around the language and also where people are starting from and what we mean by these different things. So you said N equals 1. And when we say evidence-based, I think a lot of people go to scientific studies. And from you and I, our experienced evidence is you, the person, as well as the anecdotes, as well as the coaching experience. So When we talk about tracking, there's different types of tracking, right? And I definitely want to single out like calorie and macro tracking. But then I also want to understand, okay, so how do you help people build awareness or get over the issue that they're struggling with some form of measurement, tracking, awareness, whatever you want to call it? Because that's ultimately, I think, the principle that we're probably going for.
Yeah. Yeah. I absolutely have my clients track. And I think that's a big misconception. It's not that we're not tracking, but
Exactly.
we just are not tracking, numbers in that stretch of the imagination for the most part. So the way I believe my program, which formerly was called the Balanced Eating Blueprint, is now called the Metabolic Revival Method. And I did change it because it really is, I think when you put the word eating in a program, it's great, but nutrition is one of my 6 pillars, which, as we know, the metabolism is a holistic thing.
For sure.
And so I coach on what I call my 6 pillars of a healthy metabolism. And that is nutrition, yes, but movement, sleep, stress, gut health, and mindset, because they are pillars. I don't call them silos because they do not exist separately. Like, they are pillars. And if we are, ourselves are a building being held up by all 6, they all need to be strong, right? And in order to have a real high functioning metabolism. But when it comes to the nutrition pillar and we talk about food, I do have my clients track, but we're like old school, literally hand tracking. And I say that because you absolutely have to bring awareness to what you're eating, right? What gets measured gets managed. And what I always say, what we think we're doing, what we're actually doing are 2 different things until you go write it down. So I do have my clients track, and that is our data, really, for a lot of things, including not just are we able to lose weight, but are we properly balancing our macronutrients? How is our energy? Are we responding well to our food? So, when I have my clients track, we're not just looking at the calories and the macro breakdown. We're looking at, did it keep you full and satisfied, right? Because that's not just about the macro composition. Did you enjoy the meal? Were you gassy, bloated, brain foggy after, or did you feel fueled and energized and have mental clarity? So really actually getting in touch with not only the food you're eating, but how your body is uniquely responding to those things.
This is great. So you have them track with side by side with each meal, those factors, right?
Digestion, satiety. I've created my own tracker, unique, that I use inside my program. And it's not only those factors, but also I let meal timing, right? So I want to know when you ate. I want to know why you ate, whether that was actual hunger, or sometimes obviously we eat not out of hunger, right? This world would not have a problem if we only ate when we were hungry. But sometimes we eat for schedule, right? Sometimes we had breakfast at 8 and we're not really hungry at 11, but we've got a meeting midday and we won't have a chance to eat till 3. So sometimes we actually should eat for a scheduling purpose, right? So we're looking at all of that sort of stuff. So I track what they're having, when they're having it, time of day for meal timing, the mood they're in when they're having it, right? Because we shouldn't eat in a stressed state. And then, yes, how they feel after, whether they feel full, satisfied, energized, mental clarity, or bloated, gassy, brain foggy, tired, need a nap, that kind of stuff.
And how would you compare that to, so when people think of tracking and you mentioned how it's stressful, it's overwhelming, or it's obsessive, or whatever the word is, where most people think of an app, a food tracking app, a food logging app, right? And I agree that many of those apps are just terribly designed as well. And they're also, they're good at shaming you when you don't hit targets and things like that. How much of that is part of the problem versus if your hand tracking was an app,
right?
Would that be like a good food tracking app?
I think one of the challenges that I find with apps like MyFitnessPal, I use Chronometer with my clients who are tracking so we can see nutrient density and everything. But I think part of the problem is that as soon as we throw an number, even if you tell someone not to look at the numbers, as soon as we throw numbers in there, a lot of people have these, again, especially if I work with a lot of women, right, of my age group, so who come from diet culture. They see a number of grams of carbs. Oh, that must be too much, right? There's automatically this. I feel like dieting has rid women in particular of their self-trust, and they can't trust their body to know. None of my clients when they come in are barely ever in touch with their hunger cues, right? It's externally driven. Like, well, this is an appropriate number or portion or size. But if you took 2 people and asked them that, like, right, it's completely different depending on what preconceived notions they come in with. So I just find that sometimes the visible numbers are helpful for people, and I'm all about using them when they are. Oftentimes in the initial stages, when women have been tracking by calories or macros or something for a long time, they're so swayed by those that it's hard to get in touch with their own hunger cues, satiety cues, relationship with food issues. So I find that removing those numbers for a period of time can be helpful to actually get them back into touch. Like, why am I eating? Am I actually hungry for this? Am I trying to hit a number? Right? Those sort of things.
That makes a lot of sense because these things can be a distraction, right? They're like this short-term metric that honestly is meaningless in the moment until it's taken in context and connected to something else. And I wonder, so how do you feel about the scale? Because that's another controversial area where one of my struggles with clients is, we want to have data over time, but I also don't want them to even care what's happening day to day because it fluctuates so much.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? Yeah.
So I do, and again, very individual with my clients. In general, I do recommend use of the scale on a daily basis. And part of the reason is to actually decrease that emotional attachment to it. So, I show them graphs over time and really explain that we do have to zoom out, right? This is not day to day that we're looking for. We're looking for week to week averages. And even as a female, if I have females that are still cycling, we're not, a male, you could compare average week 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. Women, I'm looking at, period week of month 1 to period week of month 2, PMS week of month 1 to 2. What are those sways? I use it again as data for them to get to know their bodies. And this is also how I can teach them that there are different things that affect the scale than just what you ate. Because women, when they start doing this, will learn that they could eat the same thing 5 days in a row and their scale is up and down. And they're like, what the heck? I must need to eat less. I'm like, no, this is natural fluctuations. It can this is why we track on their trackers also how much they slept the night before, right? What their water intake is. So it's a learning tool for me to be able to use it with them to explain that, okay, you see the scale went up, I must have to eat less. I see you slept 3 hours the night before, right? You're stressed because you have a deadline at work and your kids are this. So they start to see the correlation between these other factors and the scale. And that when they start managing stress, that comes down. So it really does actually help that detach that emotion from it.
Yeah. And I'm going to put you in the same league as Holly Baxter, who I recently interviewed, and she brought up something similar with fiber, right? How, the intake of fiber and carbs and things can just massively change your fluid retention and thus your scale weight. But connecting to it is the key that you keep coming back to. This is like the theme. So then if you're starting to make those connections for your hunger signals and what you eat, when you need it, et cetera, where does a target or a goal come in?
Yeah. Well, do you mean in terms of like actual nutrition?
What you eat, how much you eat, things like that. Like if you have a fat loss goal. Yep.
You got it. Yeah. So I use a plating system with my clients, a visible kind of visual plate. And built into that is ensuring they're getting enough fiber and protein. So each plate should have 2 to 3 cups of veggies. Breakfast is a bonus. Not everybody does that, but at least lunch and dinner, 30 plus grams of protein. And then the fats and the carbs are what we toggle. That's what's variable. So I always say protein and produce constant. Other ones are variables. And that is where we toggle. So this is where a lot of women come in, and I'm sure you see this a lot. I'm eating healthy, but I'm not losing weight. I'm like, well, you can be eating healthy and maintenance. Once you get to your goal weight, I'm sure you're going to be eating healthy and maintaining, right? So when we start tracking, I teach them about the plate, the guidelines, why. I'm a big fan of, if you understand why, like that fiber helps stretches your stomach, turns off your hunger hormones, keeps you full. Protein, same thing, turns down your hunger hormones. So they understand why they're creating that plate the way they are, and that they have the freedom and flexibility, and that not every day needs to look exactly the same. I think it would be strange if we were all the exact same amount of hungry every single day, right? So it gives them that little bit of freedom. And then when I look at their data, again, we're going to look at like a 7-day period of tracking. And once we have your plates balanced and you're eating fiber, protein, fats, carbs, and scale staying the same, then I say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to skim down those fats and carbs just a little bit off every meal. And for example, that can look like taking a half a cup of rice down to a third a cup, like a half an avocado down to a quarter of an avocado. And then they can still keep the same flavor profile of their meals, right? It tastes the same because we're going to do little bits off all meals. They don't even really notice a difference. And it's a very easy way to put someone into a calorie deficit without them feeling like they have to remove their favorite foods or, leave things out or feel like they have to measure it down to the gram. And it gives them that freedom and flexibility to also just, maybe there's a meal they say, I don't really want the carbs here because I'm going out to dinner and I know I'm going to have actually, quite a bit more. So that's good. I'm flexible like that.
I hear you. My wife's birthday is next week and I'm in a fat loss phase, Christina. Yeah. So I'm thinking about, I already ordered her the cake and we're going out to a nice restaurant. So, you got to make that work.
Absolutely.
So what's cool is that you're getting to the same behaviors through different methods, is the way I'll put it.
Yes.
In that, like if somebody was tracking macros, what would change in a fat loss? Well, the fats and carbs would come down. And if you're not dialed in with protein and fiber, you're going to get super hungry and you're not going to hold on to muscle. So you're kind of approaching it just from a different angle, which I love. What about the situation where the aggressiveness of the fat loss is a factor and kind of the amount somebody is hoping to lose, let's say, that's going to affect all of this. So there's a patience component to this, I imagine, where like, I've got 30 pounds to lose, but like, how hungry do you want them to kind of accept, or are they doing this in a way that they're not accepting too much hunger? Or, what's your metric for that?
My metric for that is I tell people when we're in a weight loss phase, like your goal is to lose, and again, fat loss phase, because obviously the method I use is based on fat loss, but I think my clientele tends to use the words weight loss more, right?
Sure.
But basically I tell them if we could eat to about 80% fullness, meaning at the end of every meal, you could eat more, but you don't have to, right? I think we all know that feeling where it's like, yeah, I'm not stuffed. I could eat, but I don't really have to. And so that's usually the kind of guideline I give people to go by. When we're in a maintenance phase, then we can eat till we're full, right? Like that meal, like I don't think I could have any more. And again, you're not going to do that every meal of the day, or you'd probably end up being in a surplus. But that's kind of how I tie into like, what is it that feeling? So I don't have to rely on an external number to know I'm in a deficit, right? And then the other thing is I tell people that's why we're looking at your weekly average weight. Guess what? If you're learning that feeling of eating to about 80% full and the scale's going down, guess what? You're in a deficit, and you didn't need to look at a number to know you're in a deficit. Like we're figuring that out. Or if it's not the scale that's going down, it's your inches, right? Like that's the other thing is it is, as you know, and all of your audience, I'm sure knows that learning curve of, and I explain to women when they come into my program, this is not going to be like you went on Optavia and you dropped 20 pounds in a month, because that would be, the incorrect way, which is why you gain it back, right? So I always say when you lose 3 to 5 pounds in my program, it's going to feel like like 15 in a different, because they're losing so many inches, right? But so that's kind of I say, like when we look at the data, if either the scale's going down or your inches are going down, we know we're in a deficit or a correct fat loss without having to actually be like, weighing your chicken breast.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for folks who track or don't track when they've at least mastered these skills. You kind of get in tune with, this is the level of hunger or fullness I have. And I know from having tuna on I actually use some low carb bread. That's one of my processed foods when I'm in fat loss. I ate that and I'm like, I have an apple over here, but I'm going to save that for my snack later because I'm good. You're just kind of like good. You get used to it.
Yeah.
So I have a whole bunch of side questions here. This is really good.
Yeah.
What is your entry criteria for fat loss? Because, people are hearing this and I know you want to get them ready. Like they need to be ready, including the emotional side and the cravings. And some people are going to take longer than others. What are your criteria to be ready?
Yeah. So we start, my program with what I call the priming phase. And that is where, for me, it's all biofeedback based. So if people aren't familiar with that term, biofeedback is your hunger. I always say, because I work with women, like, ask yourself, how is she feeling? And then it's like she, SSHE. So sleep, stress, hunger, energy. And, hunger goes with cravings. Energy also goes along with mood and recovery from your workout. So those are my criteria. I will not put somebody into a attempt at fat loss or weight loss until we're sleeping well, right? Stress is well managed. Hunger is controlled. Craving, no outlandish cravings. Energy is good. And if they are active and, they're recovering from their workouts. So really the criteria is that we learn how to balance our plates. So they're eating by the meal structure, right? We're hitting protein goals, which again, at least 30 grams at the meals, but then I help everyone individually figure out what is their goal based on whether they're looking to maintain, right, their weight loss goal. And then if obviously it's very hard for people to get that in 3 meals. So then we add in strategic protein snacks, et cetera. So I have to make sure people are hitting their, getting enough fiber, getting their protein. They have their balanced plates down. We're at a place where they're not feeling restricted, deprived, binging behavior, any of that. They're sleeping well. Their energy is good. So if all biofeedback is good and they've learned their plate structure, then we can start, that's kind of like the foundational. And then we can start that kind of skimming process of skimming things down. But I always tell women that you have to look at the whole body and the person in which you are trying to approach fat loss. Because if you're mentally ready, but your life is a big stress bucket at the moment, right? Dieting is a stressor, fat loss is a stressor. So I always tell people it still might not be the right time. There's plenty of progress to be made in maintenance. So we have to look at not only, are your plates in order, but like what's going on in your life at the moment too, to make sure it's the right time.
Yeah. And I assume there's some level of, I'll say, tolerance or flex depending on it's like a relative improvement for the person, right? Or you don't want everybody to be a 10 out of 10 on everything.
No, oh gosh, no. Yeah, and there's this, as you know, as a coach, and that's why there's nuance to this. And then the human coach you're coaching, right? That's why I say N of one, right? So there's some people that are, take a little bit longer, right, to really kind of understand. There's other people that are just skimming the surface of balancing their meals and they're ready, so it all kind of depends. And like I said, it depends on the dieting history and how long they have. If someone came into my program and has been under eating for, a decade, 5 years, even 1 year, or have come off a program like Optavia or something like that, we're going to balance their plates and build them up to like a good maintenance and learn that and stay there for a little bit, right? Before we pull the trigger to skim, just like you would with anybody else, because we have to keep in mind, how adapted or maladapted their metabolism is when they come into the program too. So that history plays into it. Yep.
And again, I'm always asking for a friend on the show because our whole audience is friends. There might be people new to the show, people that have no clue who I am or you are. I'm playing the idiot here as if I don't know any of this stuff, but half of it I might not because you have your own unique approach. So blood sugar, I want to touch on that because I do love this topic. I think it can get misconstrued and it could get definitely overhyped, like fear-mongered. But I talk about it all the time as like a massive game changer if you do it right. So to talk about what that means, blood sugar balancing or using blood sugar as a metric to improve your food.
Yeah. And I get a lot of with the social media world right now and everyone, wearing their CGMs or continuous glucose monitors and stuff. I get a lot of questions. Do I need one? I'm like, no, because we can tell
if you wear one of those, it's going to tell you not to eat potatoes.
Right. Well, so in here's the thing. Yeah. And then it won't. But again, I think the normal person doesn't quite know how to, interpret the data. So, I always tell people let's tie it into symptoms, right? Someone comes to you, they're like, I'm constantly hungry. I've got a lot of cravings, or I have a 2 p.m. energy crash, or I'm in the kitchen late at night, right? So when we talk about balanced blood sugar versus erratic and imbalanced blood sugar, the erratic and imbalanced blood sugar is creating mood swings, energy dips, like highs and lows, cravings, hunger. So that is your body's interpretation of the highs and lows of a blood sugar. I always tell people, think about like the Six Flags, like the biggest roller coaster in the place, right? The highs and the lows, the ups and the downs. That's what we want to avoid. We want to be on the little kiddie roller coaster that has like, looks like lazy river kind of thing. Because when, blood sugar rises and dips are natural. And when you eat food, right, it's going to change. But we want to avoid those high swings and lows because those are typically what's creating the primary complaints of people who are coming in struggling with nutrition and weight loss, right? They have hunger. They have cravings. Their energy dips. They need the caffeine and the sugar at mid-afternoon. So, built into the structure of my plate is keeping your blood sugar balanced, right? So when we have our carbohydrates in the presence of protein and fiber, right, it mitigates the effect on our blood sugar. And that's what helps keep us on that kiddie roller coaster. So I really I'm a big fan of, give a man a fish, he eats once, teach a man a fish, he eats for life. Like I really teach women about how their body is working and how the foods they eat and in the way which they eat them is impacting their blood sugar. I call it really food organization, not elimination.
Yeah, I love that because even how you sequence your foods in a meal can have an effect on those, right? And people don't understand that. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It sounds like it's even just balancing your macros throughout the day could help a lot of folks who are normally jumping protein over here and then carbs over here.
Yes.
Where does walking, movement, and even strength training fit into the blood sugar equation?
Yeah. So, movement is the second pillar of my program, and that encompasses both exercise and non-exercise movement. And so, when it comes from the way our metabolism is broken down, our total daily energy expenditure, 15% of the calories you burn comes from non-exercise movement, 5% from exercise. So the first thing I teach women is that we don't have to be stressed about not working out 7 days a week, right? Because the non-exercise movement is more important. When it comes to blood sugar, they both have a huge impact, right? So the more non-exercise movement we do, particularly timing your walks after meals and such, obviously helps balance your blood sugar because your muscles are your biggest uptakes of glucose. So you eat a meal, you've got glucose in your blood. If you can put that to use, so go for a walk, or if you can't go for a walk, do 50 chair squats, go up and down the stairs in your house or walk down the hall at work or whatever, you're going to be utilizing that sugar from your meal. So it's not going to be free floating in your blood and keeping your blood sugar spiked. When it comes to exercise, and of course, weightlifting is what I recommend that women are doing and everyone really is doing. Again, your muscles are your biggest stores of your glucose. So you will absolutely have a better blood sugar response and insulin response when you can build more lean muscle tissue. And when we're exercising, we actually don't need insulin to take that sugar into our blood as well. So it helps with insulin resistance and really our overall insulin sensitivity.
Yeah, I like that. I like to reframe insulin as a huge friend of ours when we lift weights. It's a massive friend for our shuttling nutrients and stuff. Cool. So one other thing you mentioned was, or maybe you didn't mention this. Let's talk about processed foods and indulgences, right?
Yes.
That's a big one because we're big into flexibility, and if people are coming to you struggling with emotional eating and, they binge on that chocolate or they eat the baked goods or the donuts. And the message is like, well, you can probably still eat those, but how do we make this all work?
Yeah. Well, so the first thing I always say is my approach is definitely health first weight loss and health first fat loss. So I always tell women like food quality matters, right? And not only matters for, as we know, staying full and all that stuff, but it really does matter in terms of we are doing everything we're doing to promote health. I will never assist someone in weight loss that's going to be detrimental to their health. But food quality does matter because I think this world is over obsessed with macronutrients and nobody's talking about micronutrients. And it is the vitamins, the minerals, like all of those things that we need that come from our foods that are giving us that, glowing skin and shiny hair and good energy and really essential for every microscopic process and cellular turnover that's going on in your body. So we can't ignore food quality. The way I teach women, because it is not, I think that, when people say 80-20, right? Like that works for some people like 90-10, some 70-30, like it's a hard thing to follow. And this is exactly how I teach my kids, which is a great thing because I feel like, working with women that have kids, I say we have our empowered choices for food, which those are the whole foods. And then we have our sometimes foods. And that's how I call them sometimes foods because, fruits, veggies, whole grains, protein, lean protein, you can eat those at any meal, anytime. But the things like the cake, the cookies, the donuts, the ice cream, those are for sometimes. They're just not all the time food. And so it's a really great way for people to grasp the concept. Like, yeah, I can have those sometimes. And when we're working on weight loss, I always say it's about aligning your actions with your goals. And so sometimes if a woman has a week where, let's just say all her meals, yes, are balanced and she's sleeping well and her stress is managed, she's doing her movement, but the scale's not moving, one of the first things we do is we look back and say, well, like how many days did you include some sometimes foods, right? Because maybe that snack is a little less favorable or, end of the day with some wine or some ice cream. And it might be 4 days. I'm like, okay, well, that might be enough to put you in maintenance right now. So what if next week we just take that down to like 1 or 2? And that's a simple way to track where they don't feel restricted and they just know, okay, this is also teaching people to be intentional, think ahead, look at your week. What do you have going on? Yeah, maybe there's a dinner out on Friday and that's the day you want your sometimes food. So Monday through Thursday, you're just going to keep it pretty clean, right? And then they can see that if the scale goes down the next week, that's how they're learning their threshold of in weight loss mode. How frequently can I, have some of those less than empowered choices? Okay. And then when I'm in maintenance, maybe that can be 3 days a week and I'm good. So it's a really nice way to help people kind of learn that like, yeah, you have that wiggle room for the fun and that sort of stuff. But we're still looking at, again, when we're tracking how it's making you feel. Like, did you wake up with a headache the next day? Did you feel like crap? Because then it doesn't become, I've told you can't have anything because I will never, I can't. It becomes, I'm choosing not to have that because I don't want to feel that way anymore,
You're a beast at the psychology because this is what it's all about, right, Christina? Like it really is.
Love the psychology.
And you kind of train yourself. It sounds like if you put in place a lot of what you've talked about already, like fiber, blood sugar balance, enough protein, a lot of those tend to teach people to like those foods more anyway.
Yes.
And you get to, I don't feel great when I go to the restaurant or I don't feel great when I have too much of this food over here. Sometimes food. So if it's more than sometimes, maybe that's the thing keeping you at maintenance,
So let's look at the frequency of it, right?
Yeah. All right. So you've got somebody into fat loss. They've dialed in some of these things. They're not perfect, 80%, like many of us. And metabolic adaptation is going to happen, right? This is just inevitable for everybody listening that their metabolism is going to decline during fat loss, even if you're doing it at a reasonable glide path. And normally somebody going through that with this history of, say, yo-yo dieting, it'd be this massive uncertainty and black hole of what's going on. And now I feel like I can't lose weight, right? So when you're working with women, they've gotten to this good state, they're in fat loss. How do you deal with that?
And again, just kind of on a case-by-case basis. And as you know, it all comes with like what their dieting history was, how long they've done it, et cetera. So and let's just take 2 different avatars. So for example, one woman who maybe has 80 pounds to lose, right? And she's been in a fat loss phase, weight loss phase, and she's lost about 45 of it, but we're 6 months down the road. we take a break. And that's probably one of the hardest things to convince people of, because I think a lot of people, women, everyone, think that it's like from this weight to goal weight is point A to point B. We're not stopping or taking a detour. But as you know, and this is where I come from educating about how their body works, is that adaptation is happening, and that we do need a break for the body and also the mind. And that's the other thing, is there's a level of burnout when someone has this more significant amount of weight to lose, right? To be focusing on weight loss for so long. So I tend to do that season, like on a season by season basis, right? So I had a lot of women who I actually had them take a maintenance break over the holidays, because guess what? Maintenance is a skill. So to learn, I think so many of us come from, we're either in a mode of losing weight or we're gaining weight, and that we don't know how to just kind of pause and maintain. So I have people, if they have a long time to lot of weight to lose, and we need to take that little break to prevent any sort of too much adaptation, that we take a maintenance break. And just how I taught you is how we analyze, when we're in weight loss versus maintenance. What do they get to do in maintenance? That can look like different for everybody. If someone likes to include more sometimes foods, maybe that's what it looks like. If someone just wants to eat a little bit more at every meal, like even like then more nutritious fats and carbs, add those, like increase a little bit, right? Maximize your energy, lift a little bit more, right? Think all this, there's so many things that can happen. And it's a skill to learn how to maintain and not gain, right? So we take breaks and then we resume. So I did a lot of that with people over the holidays, and we resumed in January and then continued into weight loss mode. And now they feel like they built that little bit of trust in themselves. Like, wow, I used to gain 5 pounds over the holiday. Now I actually know how to maintain, and then I can go back and lose some more, and I'm refreshed for it. So I definitely incorporate breaks. If someone maybe just comes in and they only have, under 20 pounds to lose, oftentimes we don't need to institute that in terms of the adaptation, but sometimes we do for the psychology, like you said, the psychology piece, the mindset piece. Sometimes it can be like, I've got a calendar where a month of travel for work and social events and everything. And honestly, like, let's just maintain, because guess what? A month is a really short period of time, and you can get right back at it after. And sometimes that stress of trying to be focused on weight loss when food is out of your control a little bit more often, or traveling, then we don't need that added stress. So let's focus on movement. Let's focus on stress management. Let's focus on sleep, mindset work, and then slide back into a weight loss, fat loss mode after. So it can be seasonally, it can be situationally. And again, I think it's just all embedded in that is helping women understand that they can start to trust their bodies again, that they're not going to just turn on them.
Yeah, that confidence in physique development, it's not just your physique, but I mean, your body, being able to control it,
yes,
and control not gaining and not just losing is really powerful, because like you said, then you could go after it with a newfound energy. I wonder what about the extreme case where someone has a very over responsive metabolism, right? It drops a lot. Like, you've seen these avatars, it runs the gamut, where they would just have to really eat a lot fewer calories to continue at that pace. Do you reassess and say, hey, we're going to slow down the end goal of where you're going to get to, or what? Because even if you take a break, it's going to resume at that level.
Yeah. I really biofeedback based. Like I said, the body will not lie to you. So I feel like if I do start to notice, like people are telling me I have more cravings this week, or I found myself just thinking about that ice cream in my freezer every night, those sort of things, or gosh, my workouts, I just can't, I'm sore all the time, so it really kind of depends on, I go by biofeedback, because that really is the language of your metabolism. I always tell you, if you can learn how to speak metabolism, which is those sort of things, then you can kind of know. So if someone's biofeedback is all good and they're still losing weight, and even if it seems like, well, we probably should take a break, but biofeedback is fine, I don't mess with anything, right? I don't mess with anything. It's only when I start to see biofeedback start to suffer that then we will maybe put the pause on things until everything, then we build that back up, get biofeedback where we want it, and then resume.
Okay, cool. And when somebody takes a break, so here's where our approaches are slightly different in what we track sometimes, but one thing I definitely like to calculate someone's TDEE based on their food and weight. And you'll see situations where when you do take a break, they're not eating enough to fully recover. They're kind of hovering under there. And partly is because the skill you've given them kind of allows them to stay in that state without it feeling too bad. But it also kind of slows down that recovery. So how do you help address that? Again, is it biofeedback still? Or
I definitely do kind of exactly the opposite of what we do to lose, like skim fats and carbs, and you don't really notice the difference. I strategically instruct them how to add that in without really noticing like they're going to get over full, right? So, so I know you're feeling pretty comfortable with that, like half a cup of oats at breakfast and, I don't know, like 1 tablespoon of dressing at lunch on your salad. Why don't we actually bump that up a little bit, a little bit more oats, 3/4 a cup, maybe put 2 tablespoons on. So you're not really noticing it. It's not making you feel different. You're not feeling overstuffed. We're not getting digestive distress. But I know in my head that that's a simple way to add 150, 200 calories
for sure
a day without
peanut butter.
Right. Yeah, that's what I said. I said, give me a jar of peanut butter. I can crush that in 30 seconds. So I get 500 extra calories. But yeah, so that's really how I do it. It's kind of teaching them that same skill without having to look at the number. Let's just incrementally add a little bit, nourish your body, because when we eat not enough, there's always some system of our body that's having to pull from, and we don't want that, right? So kind of explaining to them that that's again how your body's working. So we need to actually boost that back up. And that's the same method I take with them at the end when we're kind of, what everyone else would technically call a reverse diet. I call it we're just going to fuel you back up. So yeah, you feel good because your hunger hormones are controlled, but now we're going to slowly and incrementally add back in so that you don't gain, you don't really notice it, but now we're giving your body more of what it needs.
Yeah. And you're closing that loop again where you said maintenance is a skill, and they'll know that when all is said and done, they'll be able to sustain these results forever. What about, do you use refeeds or kind of calorie cycling? Again, I know you're not tracking calories, but you said seasonally. So I assume even week to week or intra week, you might have people change their patterns.
Yeah. Yeah. And that again is, I don't tend to attract people who are, I don't want to say attract. Most of my clientele is not maybe lifting so significantly heavy or intensely that they need these refeeds. I'm often working with more of the perimenopausal woman who needs to learn how to scale back on the intensity of the exercise and that sort of stuff. So typically with my clientele, we're not really there where we need refeeds. I, again, am all about the mental and the physical break. So if it happens to be, a weekend where there's a couple nights out or a couple nights where you just have more or whatever, great, that your body needed that. You use that, put it to use for a great workout the day after, but it's not so strategically planned in. It's more self-guided, or like I said, I kind of use that intuition with them.
Which is consistent with it computes. And also the word refeed, all these terms we use are so, I don't want to say they're pretentious sometimes, but sometimes they are, like you said, reverse dieting. It's funny.
Well, so, I think the only reason I put that in air quotes, because I always approach my program where it's not a diet, right? It's a lifestyle. Right. But that's how I explain that is a phase of my metabolic mastery program, which is what I call stabilization, meaning we're now going to stabilize you at this new weight, eating more. And it essentially is the reverse diet, which is what most people would, term it. Yes.
Yeah. Let's talk about sleep and stress. I know you mentioned them earlier. You can lump them together, but also not. There's very distinct things about them. So there's a lot of conventional wisdom or the same old kind of advice about both. For sleep, it's, okay, you need a certain amount of hours of sleep. You need to do all these not hacks, but, change your environment, sleep ritual, blah, blah, blah. And then for stress, the talk is always about sleep or stress coping mechanisms. Is that the way that you frame this, or is there a more targeted, practical approach for people?
Yeah. When I talk about stress, I use the term stress because that's what, translates to people. I really mean nervous system regulation. So, as we know, and I explain to my clients, we have 2 arms of our nervous system, sympathetic, parasympathetic, right? Sympathetic is that fight or flight, which most women are in from the minute they get up to the minute they go to bed. It is go mode until you hit the pillow. And then parasympathetic, that rest and digest, which none of us are really accessing during the day. So, the way I explain it again is that is the shift that happens with the female metabolism as we enter perimenopause, is we are less stress resilient and more sensitive to stress. And when I say stress, it can be in all forms. A lot of people think the perceived stress, like I got a deadline at work, my kids are driving me crazy, I'm playing parent Uber, I've got sports games to go to, right? But that's one form of stress, that's perceived stress. But there is circadian stress, which is where sleep comes into the stress mix. There is stress from, imbalanced blood sugar, that's inflammatory stress, right? There's stress in our body on that. There's stress from the toxins in the food we eat and the environment we have and our cleaning products and all of that sort of stuff. So, and there's stress from exercising too much, right? There's stress from moving too little. So it really is, when I talk about stress, it's about mitigating all forms of stress on the body as best we can. And that's where you'll hear sleep tied into that, even though I think sleep is its own separate entity. But I really kind of am training women when you're thinking of the perceived stress, is that we're looking at nervous system regulation. So how often during the day can we activate that parasympathetic nervous system? Because when that's activated, the sympathetic is not. That cannot be going at the same time. So using simple things like breath work, right? 3 squared breaths, quickest way to activate your parasympathetic nervous system. Grounding, can be things like a guided meditation, a quick gratitude practice, a journaling. So when we're talking stress as in the perceived stress, that is really how I'm talking about it. It's like, let's actually talk about it as nervous system regulation. So taking out of our stress nervous system and into our rest nervous system.
And what are your thoughts when it comes to perceived stress? If you can't change a situation, right, which is oftentimes true.
Yeah.
But two different people perceive the same stressor differently, causing different internal stress in that part of the nervous system. So do you talk through that? Are there mechanisms where people can let things go when they happen to them, so to speak?
Yeah. And I use a lot of, that's where it comes from. It's not about like everyone's perception, like you said, is different. This is subjective. It's not objective. So it's more about, I always, that cliche saying, like what happens around you is not a match for what happens within you. So it's like, we're not about removing the stressors in your life. We're about mitigating the stress on your nervous system. So it might take somebody, an Epsom salt bath for a half hour, some legs up against the wall of meditation and 20 minutes of breathing to get over a snafu during their day. Where for somebody else, it might take, a quick little release, and that's it. So that's on a person-to-person basis. It's about how, I always say we have this like stress management toolbox, and it's like, how many tools do we need to pull out of the toolbox at any given time? And that is going to be based on your perceived amount of stress. So, for one person, it might mean like, let's just insert a little bit of midday breath work, like a physiological sigh, and that's enough for them. For someone else, it's like, well, I'm doing that, but I'm still like, short with my kids, craving sweets and all this stuff. Then we need to add in a little bit more layers to that puzzle.
Okay. And I asked, do you know Adam Badger? And he's in our group.
Yeah, he's local to me, actually. I was on his podcast a while ago.
Yeah. So he was on the show. I was on his, and he was on my show, and his episode will be coming out soon, probably a little before yours, actually. And one of his specialties seems to be like helping people understand the trigger of why they react the way they do to stressors. And I just thought that was a very intriguing, yet other helpful angle for folks. Because I was thinking of my own life, how I used to like be road rage was easy to come to me.
Yeah.
And then I had kids, and I got too many speeding tickets. And I started to like actually obey the speeding laws. Yeah. And then when I met my wife, who's like super kind and forgiving of people, and she'd be like, that guy's just having a bad day. And I started to integrate that thinking just by osmosis to where now like all the shit on the road doesn't really affect me. And I'm like, well, can we train ourselves by digging into the trick? That's why I bring it up. It's just
I love that. I'm actually reading, I don't know if you've ever heard of the motion code and the body code. So I just started reading this, and it's a lot about that, like identifying the kind of energy fields in your body and what's going on. But I use a lot of, and just pulling from my own experience, because as we were talking about the cancer card in my family before, when I was going through some real hard times with my sister being ill, and I'm an empath, and I worked in healthcare, and I was working with sick patients, I was just holding everything, right? Like everything.
Oh, you were a vessel for everyone's like emotional stress. Yeah.
And so, I do work with women on specific mantras and things and affirmations that can help them. So, one of my favorite ones that has become now a favorite of my clients is like, when you're supporting people through things, I would say to myself, I help, but I don't hold. Like I'm helping you, but I'm not holding this energy. Or I care, but I don't carry. I care about you, but I'm not carrying this as like something that's happening to me. Or deep breaths, like, inhaling, saying I release, and a big open mouth exhale, I let go. So I really use kind of strategic things and mantras, because as we know, those have to like resonate with you to use, but like for each individual and whatever they're going through. And this is why coaching is coaching, right? It's not a transfer of information. It's not just, hey, manage your stress and get 7-8 hours of sleep. It's like, let's actually like dig into your own stressors and what will help you around that. So I definitely believe there is a nuance to all of that. And depending on the person, depending on how they react in response to certain things, and then what tools I can give them to help them manage that on their own.
Got it.
Hello, I am Berkeley, and I wanted to give a huge thank you to Philip of Wits and Weights. He has helped me so much, gave me a completely free 30-minute call where he answered all of my questions, gave lots of great insight into programming and nutrition. All of his content is really wonderful, and he has a great Facebook group that is supportive and informational. He has tons of free resources that I really, really enjoy, and they're all super science-based. What I really love about Philip is that he always updates his guides, and he makes time to answer any questions. Even though I am not currently a paying client, he really has helped me so much, and I'm just so grateful.
All right. So there's something you like to talk about that is also very popular now, and the research is still being developed. It's gut health, right? I want to talk about that because it's one of your pillars. It's like a whole pillar, right?
Whole pillar,
and that's important because I used to be kind of skeptical. This is like 2 years ago. I was just getting into coaching. Like, what is this? But it's powerful. Tell us why it's so important to everything.
Yeah. I mean, you'll hear a lot of those terms like the gut is the second brain. I actually kind of think of it as like the first brain. It's not just brain communicating down to the gut. It is absolutely the other way around as well.
That's right. Yeah.
So, the gut brain axis is very for real. So psychologically, what's going on with us will affect our gut. What's going on in our gut will affect us psychologically. So when we, our gut, if you think of it as this, the microbiome, right? This big series of all these little microbes in there, they're all feeding off of what we put in our body, right? And if they're not healthy, then we could be eating all the healthy food in the world and not absorbing those nutrients, right? And there's a lot of women who are coming from a place of, completely eliminating food groups, right? And if you're eliminating an entire food group, the microbes that like to feed off that will die off until you start to feed them again. There's people that might be coming from something like Optavia, eating a lot of highly processed foods, right? Your body's not getting nourished. It's not getting the nutrients that it needs, and it cannot translate those to you and your body. And sometimes that's why women wonder, I lost all this weight on a program like that, but I felt like crap. My stomach hurt. My digestion was really crappy. Crappy. No pun intended. But I mean, I think of I came from healthcare. There's never TMI. I think of bowel movements as like an additional vital sign. So it's kind of an inclination of what's going on in your body. And, inflammation stems from the gut. We both know systemic inflammation is one of the biggest disruptors of your weight loss attempts, fat loss attempts. So we really do have to care for our gut. And the way I do that, again, without being eliminating foods or being nitpicky, I'm all about nutrition by addition, right? So part of my plate is, yes, 2 to 3 cups of veggies, but how many different colors are you getting, right? Those sort of things, the whole foods, that's why we're choosing our empowered choices and not our sometimes foods all the time, because those empowered ones are feeding our gut with what they need to digest our food properly. Our serotonin is made in the gut primarily. So if you're wondering why your mood is imbalanced, we have to have a healthy gut to have a happy life. It's an entire pillar built in, because if we're not
semaglutide is tied to the gut.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's a pillar that, again, I address in not a way that we have to, I'm not bombarding people with tons of supplements, because I think that's also one of the worst things. There are certain ones. Yes, I'm a functional nutritionist. I strategically supplement with people who need it, but a lot of people are looking for, the de-bloat pill or something on Instagram,
right,
and they're not even slowing down enough to chew our food, right? So I talk about even the process of chewing and meal hygiene and how it impacts your digestion and then what you absorb from your food. And so it's all built in around the habits and the plate that we are working on improving our gut health throughout.
Yeah. And even like you mentioned, supplements, prebiotics, probiotics, people think supplement, and yet the food you eat and how it ferments in your gut creates all of those for you.
Correct. Yeah. So in my gut health module, we talk about like the prebiotics, the probiotics, the postbiotics, which are made by the two, and what those roles play. So that, again, it becomes, okay, I'm choosing my foods now because I know the benefit they're having in my body, not just because it was on an approved or a not approved list.
Yeah. And you mentioned different colors and diversity of food. I mean, I suppose if you're trying to get a certain amount of fiber and vegetables, naturally you're going to have a little more diversity. Mm-hmm. But do you advise on specifics like, hey, get different types of apples, different types of this, different, like to that level of color, diversity?
Right. So like the color of the skin of your vegetable, if it's a red versus a green. So on my tracker that I've created, there is a little at the bottom, like how many colors, are you getting?
Oh, cool.
Check off?
All right.
Yeah, for that reason, because obviously our purple veggies are going to come and red are going to come along with different than green and orange. And so that's really kind of, it's again, a visual representation of just be mindful that we're getting different colors. And I'm not, I'm a very realistic person. So if I have someone that comes in, they're like, I don't like veggies that much. I'm like, let's pick the 1 or 2 you like and let's roll with that at first. Right. So again, it's just part of the process eventually. So if I don't want someone stressing over not getting, 10 different colors of veggies in a week.
For sure. Well, there's fruit too, right? There's fruit too.
Yeah. Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I asked that because who was on the show a long time ago? He was great. Judson Brewer, I think it was Dr. Judson Brewer, talking about all the different compounds and the different varieties of the same types of fruits and vegetables can help with your gut bacteria. I'm just curious. I'm going to call out the carnivore people here. And you're going to call them out with me, I think. And basically, what do you say to the person who's like, I did carnivore, I cut out all my fiber, now I'm feeling great, everything's awesome. And of course, it's the this is going to work for everybody type of deal. my theory is just, you did an elimination diet and you're just haven't reintroduced anything.
Right. Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, you cannot, if fiber is not a sexy topic, right? So there's not a million Instagram reels on the power of fiber, although they're coming now, like there is protein and stuff, but you cannot, if you go and read any of the research, right, you cannot deny that you are significantly lacking, you're vitamin and mineral deficient if you are only eating meats. And, oftentimes, having worked in healthcare, I did counsel a lot of clients on nutrition, and I would encounter some that were doing carnivore and were great. And then a few months down the road, they've got gallstones and kidney issues. And, so I think that this is why I always say my approach is health first, weight loss, because sure, carnivore might help you lose weight. Great. But you cannot deny that when you're removing a lot of essential vitamins, minerals, nutrients from your body, which we get from our fiber and our gut, there's eventually going to be a catch to that, right? Your body will let you know. So again, I think when we're talking about weight loss, there's a million ways to do it that might not contribute to long-term health. And so I'm not opposed to those for short periods of time if that's what people choose to use. But again, having worked with geriatrics and people who only wish they could go back in time and get their health back, you can't deny that having those foods in your repertoire that are providing you with fiber and all of those sort of things are eventually going to be needed to be reintroduced.
Yeah, I agree. And it's one thing to have flexibility and say, well, if it works for you, but it's another thing is long-term, is it really working for you?
Right.
If you're not checking the right things
how do you
here.
define work, right? Like if it works for you because all you want to do is lose 20 pounds, amazing. But
exactly.
let's think a little bit beyond, the next even year or two, like what's going to happen in 5-10 years down the road. And also, do you want to live like that forever? Like that's the other thing. It's like,
that's the main thing I usually go to. I'm like, talk to me in a year even. Tell me if you're still doing that.
Right. What do you value? Do you value being able to like have birthday cake on your birthday, right? Or your wife's birthday? Like I value that. And maybe not everyone does, but eventually, there's going to be something that's probably going to be amiss in life without having that freedom.
So one other question I had about the tracking is, you said you mainly work with peri-postmenopausal women who aren't like big, huge into lifting. Do you ever work with like physique goal oriented folks who want to be really precise? And are they tracking, or do some of them also use this approach?
It depends. Again, some of them are using this approach and having great success with that. And some of them I do transition into tracking. And I will say, I kind of am like the backward approach where most people will come in and have a program where you track macros and the goal is eventually to wean off to not track macros, right? So I actually do the reverse. We come in and we actually don't track that stuff because we get them back in touch with, understanding how their body works, hunger, fullness, why we're choosing the foods we are, how to balance our plate, biofeedback from an actual, inside, we get it now. Then there is people that then we're like, okay, now we're at a point where we need the more meticulous data. And then we go to tracking, right? And then we go to tracking. And then now usually, even if this is where I am in my life, now I can do that without being swayed by numbers or having that negative connotation because I've kind of relearned that process. So there are people that we definitely end up now, okay. And even someone who's maybe doesn't have extreme physique goals, but now we're just kind of stuck, right? We're like, it seems on paper that we're doing everything right, but the scale's not moving. So let's actually put numbers to this. Because as you know, there's a human error in tracking, even whether it be in, writing it down or in an app. And so, so then we'll use it. And like I said, I tend to use chronometer or chronometer. I don't even know how you say it, but it is my favorite because then we can also look at, vitamin and mineral and are there gaps that we need to fill in and that sort of thing when people are getting a little bit more in that we want to optimize kind of stage. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. You got a right tool for the job, depending on what level of precision you're trying to get. Even if it is by hand, that's why you made your tracker. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Do you have time for a couple rapid fire questions?
Absolutely. Love it.
All right. So what food is worst for your blood sugar balance, if that's a thing?
Mm-hmm. It's not a food. It is how you eat the food, right? So I say food organization, not elimination. I think there was this time where it was like, pick the lowest glycemic index, everything. Well, you can essentially lower the glycemic index again by pairing it with protein and fiber. So my whole thing is just try not to eat carbs alone and pair it with fat, protein, because that will buffer the blood sugar response. So the worst thing for your blood sugar is to just eat a simple burning carb on its own. That, yeah.
Is there a caveat right before you lift weights?
Right before you lift weights, your muscles will put it to use. And then, but I also still think you should have some protein before you lift weights.
Yes,
right? So
you want protein too. Exactly.
But that is when I tell people have the simplest carb you can find, right? Like we're not talking high fiber or anything right before you go lift.
For sure. And there's other reasons for that, which we're not going to get into.
Yeah.
Is there one habit you would say is most important than all others for success?
Sleep. Yeah.
Sleep. Okay.
Yeah. I think sleep sets people up for success. I think people don't realize the effect it has on your eating choices the next day, your hunger, your craving. So if I could say that the habit and break it down to the micro habit, get off your phone an hour before bed. That's the habit.
I can see that because it's also one of the hardest, I think, for people to change. It's just so ingrained in like everything about your life. So then my next question is, what is the hardest of your pillars, would you say, are the most challenging to implement? Is it the sleep or is it one of the other ones?
Gosh, I really think the mindset pillar is probably the hardest for a lot of people. And again, there's so much that we encompass, whether it be relationship with the food, behavior change, right? The all or nothing thinking. So and that is what will hold everybody up. It's how long we can get to before we can kind of really peel back the layers of the onion of the mindset.
Yeah, and that could be its own episode. We didn't even dive too much into that, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing.
How long, you talk about hunger cues. So how long does it take for someone to see their hunger cues basically normalizing, let's say?
I mean, it can happen in a week. I've done even like the free challenge I did in January. The first week the theme was protein and produce, right? And it was just like get 30 grams at your meals, get your 2 to 3 cups of veggies. The amount of people that are like, I can't believe my hunger, my cravings, that nighttime like binging is gone in like 5 days. So it's like rapid fire if depending on, where you've come in your life, but to actually feel that physiological difference, it can happen in 3 days.
Yeah. That's good. That's good for people to know. It's not, even though you have to be patient for some of this, that can happen quickly.
Oh, yeah.
What's the most overrated supplement that people keep recommending?
I would say, oh my God, there's so many that.
Yeah, there are. It's a tough question, right?
That could be a whole nother episode itself. But I think, I honestly will say supplements like the, melatonin. I'm just going to say that for sleep. Okay. And I'm going to use this example because, and whether it's melatonin or some other like nighttime sleepy something, I'm all for it. Right. But it's a supplement and it cannot take the place of, you should not be scrolling your phone till 11 and popping a melatonin to try to go to bed. Right. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of these sleep supplements, because the world is so sleep deprived. And that is one of the things that almost everybody struggles with, that they're trying to supplement for when they're not realizing that if we can get natural sunlight during the day, balance our blood sugar, stop eating 2 hours before bedtime and get off our phone and like dim our lights, you're going to sleep way better. And you could save that $80 a month on your like sleep supplement.
For sure. I love my amber glasses, I throw them on at night. And I just started using a pillow that helps my head kind of hang back a little bit. So, I'm a side sleeper, so I'm trying to be a back sleeper now. Yeah. And kind of support my neck a little bit more evenly.
Yep.
So little things like that.
What it is? That's what I use. Pillow-wise.
It's oh my gosh, I should know what it is because I just had him on the show. You can put me on the spot. Dr. Martoni.
Oh, look it up.
Neck Nest.
Oh, nice. Nest. I use Pillow-wise. It's one that like PTs and chiropractors use. It's like a little curve, and I love it too. I sleep on my back as much as I can too.
Yeah, you can get that cervical spine supported, and I wear a sleep mask too, which is so awesome.
Yeah.
But, okay, last one. What's the number one benefit your clients report that has nothing to do with weight loss or fat loss?
Not fearing food anymore. Being able to eat like a normal human. I always say that's like the goal of my program is like, I can just eat. Like, I think many of us forget like what it's like to just eat and not,
confidence in food and like they're not going to lose control. That's awesome. Mm-hmm. All right. Is there anything we didn't cover? I know there's a million things.
Oh my God, I know. I could talk to you for days.
Anything you wish I asked in this topic specifically around like tracking and not tracking?
No, I don't think, I think the take home message should be when people hear like not, you can lose weight without tracking. It's really not, as you know, we need to track, right? We need data. So
it's not quote unquote intuitive eating.
It's not, this is not so just like not track, and there's guidelines to it that are going to inherently build in that control, but it's like, we are tracking. It's just a way to track without numbers, without weighing and measuring as, so that you feel like you're not, I guess, like so encompassed by all of that sort of stuff. So just remove the stress, but there's always got to be tracking to it because like we say, what gets measured gets managed. So we have to have an awareness of some way. It's just a different form of tracking, right? To pull a little bit of stress off that.
I agree. And you're covering the key variables. Like I think even people who subscribe to tracking calories and macros, like you said, if it's just about macros, you are missing out on so much other context. But if you can put it as part of an overall system and now you can kind of pick and choose pieces that work for you. There was Dr. Sarah Ballantyne. She was on the show and she wrote the book Nutrivore. And it's funny because she has a little comment in there about like, you don't have to track calories and macros, but then she has a tracker based on nutrient quality. So I'm like, okay, there you go.
Yeah.
So anyway, where can people find you, Christina?
They can find me on Instagram at it's Christina _McClurken, which I'm sure you can write that out. And my website is yourhealthybestie.com.
Awesome. We will do that. Let's see, website and IG. We'll throw that in the show notes. Thank you so much, Christina. It was a lot of fun. Listeners are always looking for just different approaches. Something's going to work for them. Something's going to resonate. So I hope they reach out to you if that's right for them.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. I totally enjoyed it.
It was a lot of fun.